It was one of those nights where sleep didn't show up on time. The room was quiet, but your mind wasn't. The ceiling fan made that soft noise you only notice when you're awake longer than you wanted to be. You weren't thinking about big dreams. You were thinking about small numbers. Not the kind you show people. The kind you keep to yourself. If one payment goes through tonight, the other one probably has to wait. You've done this dance before. It's quiet. It's practiced. It doesn't feel dramatic anymore. From the outside, nothing about your life looks broken. There's a degree on the wall. A job that took effort to get. A promotion that felt like proof you were moving forward. That's what makes this feeling confusing. Nothing went wrong. And yet, something feels tight. A lot of people reach this place without realizing when the shift happened. There wasn't a single bad decision. There wasn't a moment where everything changed. It was a series of small steps that felt reasonable at the time. A slightly nicer place. A car that felt like an upgrade. Little conveniences that made busy days easier. None of it felt reckless. It felt like progress. The strange part is how quietly those upgrades become normal. At first, you notice them. Then they blend into the background of your life. They stop feeling like choices and start feeling like the environment. The bills show up on time every month. The payments line up in a neat row. They don't cause panic on their own. They just exist. Over time, they take up space. The space where ease used to live. The space where flexibility used to be. Some months feel fine. Some months feel tight. And you don't always know why the difference exists. It's not that you're spending wildly. It's that everything you chose decided to stay. A lot of people don't notice this until something small happens. A repair, a surprise bill, a random expense that shouldn't be a big deal, but somehow feels heavier than it should. It's in those moments that you realize how carefully everything is balanced. How many moving parts are quietly holding each other up. You start to see how much of your life runs on nothing going wrong. And life has never been great at following that plan. Sometimes it's a job that changes. Sometimes it's health. Sometimes it's just time passing faster than expected. The pressure doesn't announce itself. It builds slowly, like weight added one book at a time onto a shelf. No single book breaks the shelf. One day, the shelf just starts to bend. People don't talk much about that bending stage. It doesn't look like failure. It looks like normal life with slightly tighter breathing room. You still go to work. You still smile in photos. You still tell people you're doing fine. Inside, you start to notice how much mental space money takes up. Not in dramatic ways, just enough to be tiring. Sometimes you remember a version of yourself that felt lighter. Not richer, just lighter. Life didn't get worse. It got fuller. And fullness has weight. There are moments when you catch yourself comparing. Not intentionally. It just happens. Someone else's new car. Someone else's trip. Someone else's kitchen renovation. You don't feel jealous exactly. It's more like a quiet question forming in the background. Am I doing enough? Am I behind? Am I missing something? What you don't see in those moments is the invisible part of other people's lives. The numbers behind the photos. The payments behind the upgrades. The stress that doesn't show up on social media. Most people carry more than they show. They're not pretending. They're just editing. There's a strange comfort in knowing that a lot of people feel this same tightness. Not because it makes it better, but because it explains why the feeling is so common. It's not personal failure. It's a pattern that repeats quietly across millions of lives. You can trace it through ordinary choices. The kind nobody warns you about. The kind that don't feel like choices once they settle in. Somewhere along the way, money stopped feeling like a tool. It started feeling like a constraint. Not because there isn't enough coming in, but because so much is already spoken for. There's a moment, sometimes late at night, where you imagine what it would feel like to have a little more space. Not luxury, not extravagance, just space. Space to breathe when something unexpected happens. Space to say yes to something without doing math first. Space to let a problem be inconvenient instead of stressful. That version of life doesn't look flashy from the outside. It looks quiet. It looks boring. It looks ordinary. But from the inside, it feels different. It feels lighter. People who end up there usually don't get there in dramatic ways. They don't suddenly change everything. They just notice one small place where life feels heavier than it should, and they make a small adjustment. Then, over time, another. Not perfectly, not all at once, just enough to create a little space. A little room for life to move without everything feeling fragile. Nothing about your current life means you're stuck. It just means you're living inside a structure that grew quietly around you. Structures can change shape. Slowly. Gently, not with force, just with awareness. And awareness doesn't feel dramatic. It feels like a small pause in the middle of an ordinary night, when you notice the weight you've been carrying and realize you don't have to hold all of it forever. There are small moments when the weight becomes noticeable, not in a dramatic way, more like a quiet heaviness you feel in your chest when another notification lights up your phone. It's not panic, it's familiarity. You've learned how to manage it. Move this payment. Delay that one. Tell yourself next month will feel easier. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. What changes isn't always the numbers. It's the space those numbers take up in your head. You start noticing how often money appears in your thoughts. While brushing your teeth, while driving to work, while trying to enjoy a meal you technically can afford. It doesn't ruin moments. It just sits beside them. People often think stress shows up loudly. For many, it arrives quietly. It becomes part of the background noise of adult life. Over time, that background noise starts to shape decisions. Not big decisions, small ones. You choose the easier option because you're tired. You choose the familiar option because it feels safe. You choose the option that looks normal because it doesn't draw attention. Normal is comfortable. Normal is what everyone else seems to be doing. And when everyone else is doing something, it starts to feel like that's just how life works. There are days when you imagine what would happen if one small thing went wrong. Not as a fear, more like a passing thought. A car problem, a medical bill, a shift at work that doesn't go the way you hoped. You don't dwell on it. You've learned not to. Dwelling feels unproductive. Still, the thought passes through. Then life moves on. What most people don't notice is how much of their future is being quietly shaped by routines that feel harmless. Not because the routines are bad, but because they're automatic. Automatic choices don't ask permission. They just repeat. Some routines make life smoother. Some make it heavier. They can look the same from the outside. There's a moment, usually small, when someone notices a difference between how they imagined adulthood would feel and how it actually feels, not in terms of success, in terms of ease. The picture in their head had more breathing room, more flexibility, more space between effort and relief. The real version feels more packed, more scheduled, more committed. It's not wrong. It's just fuller than expected. People don't talk much about fullness as a weight. They talk about it as achievement. Busy schedules, full calendars, full lives. But fullness has a cost when there's no empty space left. Empty space is where recovery lives. It's where unexpected things land without causing damage. It's where options grow. Without space, every new thing becomes pressure. This isn't something you notice in one year. It shows up across many years, quietly. You might remember moments when life felt more open, not because you had more money, because you had fewer fixed pieces. Life adds pieces over time. Responsibilities, commitments, structures. None of them are mistakes. They're just cumulative. Sometimes, in quiet moments, you realize how carefully everything is balanced. Not fragile, just dependent on nothing shifting too much. That's when the idea of space starts to feel appealing. Not more stuff. Not upgrades. Just space. Space to adjust when life moves. Space to breathe when plans change. Space to feel like you're choosing your path instead of maintaining it. The people who seem calm about money usually aren't doing anything dramatic. They just leave more space around their decisions. They don't let every comfort turn into a permanent structure. From the outside, their lives don't look flashy. They look simple. From the inside, they feel light. Lightness doesn't come from having more. It comes from carrying less that needs constant support. And noticing that difference is often the quiet beginning of change. That quiet beginning doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with motivation speeches or dramatic promises. It feels more like a soft shift in attention. You start noticing patterns, not judging them, just noticing how often the same expenses repeat, how quickly comfort becomes expectation, how rarely space shows up on its own. You notice how much of life is built around things staying predictable, paychecks arriving on time, nothing expensive breaking, plans staying intact. When things stay predictable, everything feels fine. When they don't, the tightness becomes visible. Most people don't realize how much of their calm depends on everything going smoothly. Not because they planned poorly, because life was busy and the structure grew quietly. There's a strange moment when you realize you've become really good at managing pressure, not eliminating it, managing it. You juggle, you adapt, you tell yourself this is just adulthood. And maybe it is. But there are different versions of adulthood living side by side. Some feel heavy, some feel flexible. The difference often isn't how much money someone makes. It's how much of their life is already promised to something. When most of your future income already belongs to past decisions, the present feels crowded. Crowded days turn into crowded months. Crowded months slowly become crowded years. Time still moves. Life still moves. It just feels like you're always keeping pace instead of setting it. There are moments when you imagine a version of your life with fewer fixed lines. Not fewer experiences, just fewer obligations that don't move when you do. That version of life doesn't look impressive on a highlight reel. It looks quieter, less busy, less visually exciting. But quiet can be spacious, and spacious can feel like freedom. People who find that space usually don't stumble into it. They notice when something feels heavier than expected, and they pause. The pause doesn't change everything. It just creates a small gap. In that gap, questions show up naturally. Not urgent ones, curious ones. Why does this feel tighter than I imagined? When did this become permanent? What parts of my life quietly grew without me noticing? Those questions don't demand answers right away. They just sit there, gently reshaping how you see your own routine. Over time, that awareness changes the way decisions feel. Not bigger decisions, quieter ones. You don't rush into upgrades the same way. You notice when comfort is trying to become a default. You start sensing the weight of permanence before it settles in. Nothing about this feels dramatic. It feels subtle, like standing in the same room you've always stood in, and realizing how full it's become. Once you notice that fullness, you naturally start leaving small spaces open. Not because someone told you to, because space feels good once you remember what it's like. That quiet beginning doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with motivation speeches or dramatic promises. It feels more like a soft shift in attention. You don't rush into upgrades the same way. You notice when comfort is trying to become a default. You start sensing the weight of permanence before it settles in. Nothing about this feels dramatic. It feels subtle, like standing in the same room you've always stood in, and realizing how full it's become. Once you notice that fullness, you naturally start leaving small spaces open. Not because someone told you to, because space feels good once you remember what it's like. Leaving space doesn't feel like a decision at first. It feels like hesitation. A small pause before saying yes the way you usually do. You notice how often life offers upgrades. A little more comfort here, a little more convenience there. None of them feel wrong. They just quietly ask for permanence in return. You start to sense the difference between something that passes through your life and something that moves in and rearranges the furniture. Some things are meant to be experiences. Some things become structures. The structures are what change how your days feel. A structure doesn't announce itself when it forms. It forms when something repeats often enough to stop feeling optional. Over time, optional things turn into expectations. Expectations turn into commitments. Commitments start to feel like parts of who you are. That's how lives become full without anyone planning fullness. There's a strange comfort in familiarity, even when familiarity feels heavy. You know how to carry it. You've built routines around it. Letting go of something familiar doesn't feel like relief at first. It feels like stepping into empty space. An empty space can feel uncertain. Most people don't change because they're unhappy. They change because something begins to feel unnecessary. Not painful, just heavier than it needs to be. That feeling doesn't come with instructions. It just shows up as a quiet thought you notice in passing. This doesn't need to be here forever. Not everything you carry has to be dropped. Some things belong to the season you're in. Some belong to seasons you've already moved through. Life doesn't ask you to erase the past. It just keeps offering chances to travel lighter. You might notice that when you leave small spaces open, life starts fitting into them. Unexpected opportunities don't feel as disruptive. Small problems don't feel as overwhelming. Moments of rest don't feel as rare. Space doesn't change who you are. It changes how much room you have to be. Who you already are. From the outside, nothing about your life may look different. From the inside, it feels easier to move. That ease isn't loud. It's subtle. It feels like the absence of constant adjustment. Like not having to mentally rearrange everything every time something small changes. Over time, that ease becomes familiar too. And familiarity, when it's light, is something people quietly protect. Protecting that lightness becomes almost instinctive, not in a guarded way, just in a gentle awareness of what adds weight and what doesn't. You start to recognize how certain choices linger longer than others. Some pass through your life and leave a memory. Some stay behind and ask for maintenance. Maintenance is quiet work. It doesn't look like effort from the outside, but it takes energy. Energy shows up in small ways. In how much attention your finances need, in how often you think about schedules, in how carefully you plan around obligations. When life requires constant maintenance, your mind rarely gets to wander. Wandering is where creativity lives. It's where rest lives. It's where the sense of possibility comes from. As space slowly returns, you notice moments of wandering again. Your thoughts drift while you walk. You notice things you used to rush past. Time feels less compressed. Nothing dramatic changes in your calendar, but your experience of the same days feels different. There's a version of you in the past that felt more open, not because life was easier, because fewer things were permanent. You don't become that version again. You become a new version that remembers what openness feels like. That memory shapes future choices in quiet ways. You don't rush into commitments the same way. You notice when something wants to become a permanent fixture. You pause long enough to feel whether it fits. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. Neither outcome feels like a loss. It just feels like clarity. Clarity doesn't need motivation. It comes from alignment between how life looks and how it feels to live inside it. Over time, alignment feels natural. Not because life is perfect, because fewer things are misaligned. And misalignment is what usually creates that quiet tension people carry without naming.